Good morning and welcome to today's podcast. It's the 11th of December 2012. As I mentioned yesterday, we're going to be looking today at a second session applying our knowledge from yesterday of funding. Well, first of all, we're going to apply that funding consideration to the concept of the sports development pyramid, another topic in socio-cultural studies which has been lightly examined in recent years, and we are expecting at least a possibility that it might feature in a question on your paper. So we quickly need to understand the sports development pyramid, and we are interested in primarily how do young people access from their younger years school type experience of sport and PE. How do they become elite sports performers? What is the process and what are the factors involved? And later on we're going to have a look at how funding might have implications for each of these stages. So first of all, let's specify what we mean by the foundation stage. We are talking here about young people or school children learning basic skills. And of course, from our skill acquisition, we know they're in that cognitive learning stage. Of course, this might mean they are within their PE lessons in a form of physical education. And they might be trying lots of different types of activities within this foundation stage. We therefore call it grassroots or mass participation. Everybody gets this opportunity. When we go into the participation stage, we are talking about, for example, a school or a club team involvement. Therefore, it might be about our extracurricular sport, and it might be a regular involvement. We choose the activities that we participate in. It is not a matter of attempting or trying out all of them. It becomes fun, enjoyable, and our hobby, which we do in our leisure time. Well, the performance stage, we're interested in here in the notion of representative sport. It might be related to something like county or regional or academy level sports performance and therefore competition. The emphasis of this stage is on winning, not just on taking part, and it is therefore highly competitive. So it's either highly competitive school participation or highly competitive club or regional competition, and it is highly skilled and dedicated to performance and training. Now finally, to our elite level, we are talking here about national or international levels of sporting participation. There's our elite just under there. I realise I hadn't drawn anything for a little while. Therefore, we are talking about the notion of a performance lifestyle for people who are involved at this stage. We'll be having a look at the concept of the elite stage in a bit more detail right at the end of this session. But for now, let's start to bring in this idea of funding and coming back to what we talked about in yesterday's funding session. How does public, private and voluntary funding affect these stages? Well, let's take it stage at a time. Of course, for that foundation stage, we're very much interested in experiences at school. And therefore, assuming we are talking about a state type of education, the primary funding for that foundation stage does occur through public mechanisms. So that public funding stream is particularly important here because, of course, things like school PE, primary school PE are funded via school funds in general and therefore are from taxation and are distributed by the government. As we move into the notion of participation, remembering here we're talking about school or club team involvement. Where we get into the notion of clubs, of course it becomes quite common that we get a notion of voluntary funding. You may even be paying yourself to participate in club type performances, so voluntary tends to be the case round about that participation level. But don't forget that we still have certain public funds which are distributed to the participation level. Think about grassroots and national lottery schemes that develop things like facilities, coaching opportunities. Those are targeted at the foundation and and participation stage through public schemes. Think about things such as Sport England funding, for example. When we get into the performance stage, and we are talking here about district, county, regional or academy involvement, there could be all types of funding possible here. So we have all three streams which may occur. But the one which might be most significant is private funding. We might be looking at a notion of, for example, sponsorship, which we'll put just up there, if I have the space, sponsorship might be involved by the time we get to performance level. Once we're at performance level, of course, companies are keen to market their products and their services through the effective, positive performances of better standard sports performers, and therefore they will consider sponsoring or endorsing teams, individuals, competitions and events. And that is certainly the case when we get to elite level. We have an awful lot of private investment in elite level sport. We know that our main sports competitions, athletes and events are privately, corporatively sponsored or endorsed. And it's very, very common for us to have those associations between elite sport and private, even more so when we get towards the business models of sports such as football, which is run entirely as a commercial enterprise. And finally today we're going to talk about the concept of elite level funding. So I'm going to put that up here. So in that very top echelon of our sports development pyramid, how do we actually fund and support the best athletes in the country? Well, of course, the traditional model has been primarily through the notion of voluntary funding. But that model has kind of been abandoned in recent years in favour of a more professional government-backed model, which sees national lottery, getting green here, national lottery and taxation-based funding being directed at these different levels of outstanding performance. And of course we see here that at stage 1, home county talent systems, we have typically young athletes playing in county structures. We then have those that excel at that level accessing a stage called the world-class talent, where they receive far more structured coaching, facilities, science and funding support. Those that excel at that level and perhaps are only 2 to 4 years away from winning international medals then access the world-class development stage, where they become full-time professional athletes, and then when they're at the level of producing international medals, we reach the level of world-class podium, where we would have the likes of Ennis and Farah and those kind of level athletes being salaried, supported at that stage at the English Institute of Sport relevant to their particular activity. So we're arguing that the main funding streams for these are of course public, because we are talking about funding from taxation via the government and the national lottery funding these stages. But don't forget, we also have lots of private funding, which happens particularly for those athletes at the very top of this pyramid, because of course we know that Chris Hoy is sponsored by Bran Flakes, and we know, for example, that Ennis is sponsored by Oil of Olay, which is a cream that ladies put on their bodies. Yes, that's all I know about that. I think she's also sponsored by the very famous drinks manufacturer Powerade, and she receives significant private investment from that in return for her endorsement of the product. So therefore we have a situation where these days we have public funding our primary high performance athletes. Of course, what does the government get out of this? Well, they like it because it provides a notion of popularity and popular support for their policies and their administration. So it's popular with people, and the government receives credit for such things. Perhaps that's particularly evident today post 2012 Olympic Games, where we had a lot of British success, and that perhaps has reflected very positively on the coalition government of the time. Thank you for listening today, guys. I will be back with you tomorrow, where we're going to be covering a little bit of skill acquisition, and I shall post on Twitter that podcast, our vlog I should say, as of tomorrow. Have a lovely afternoon. Oh, I should say as well, Scott's just pointed out to me, we're also uploading all of the vlogs onto Facebook, and if you search Farnborough PE on Facebook, you will find us. So if you are a Facebook user, you might just find us on there. Have a nice afternoon, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Goodbye.